You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions at theoptionsinsider.com. You wanted it, you got it. A radio program that helps teach you options trading inside and out, basic to complex. This is Options Bootcamp. Whether you want to learn how to protect your portfolio, generate income, or even become a master of volatility, the Options Bootcamp drill instructors will break it all down for you. Now, let's get you into peak options trading shape. Here are your Options Bootcamp drill instructors.
All right, everybody. That music means it must be Education Wednesday here on the old network. That means it is time to kick off the educational palooza with Options Bootcamp, the premier options educational program. My name is Mark Longo from theoptionsinsider.com, as well as, of course, from the ever-exciting network. If you haven't visited our site in a while, a lot of fun stuff cooking over there, including a lot of great data on the earnings front. We've really become kind of the bastion for earnings data, thanks to our friends over there at Orats and us twisting their arms to create a lot of great free reports for you folks. Head on over there, click on the Options News and Articles tab. You can see when your favorite names are reporting first off, and then, of course, how they performed in the past, how much vol they're pricing in now, all sorts of fun stuff after the results come out. They have, of course, comparisons. They have a whole season report as well, so we can aggregate the whole season down and see how the season is reporting. A lot of great data, and it's not really available anywhere else that I've seen. So theoptioninsider.com, click on the Options News and Articles tab. If you're intrigued at all about earnings season and how it impacts the names you like to trade, and usually it does quite a bit, then that's the place to go. And of course, if you like to engage with this content, then you get on over to theoptioninsider.com/pro is the place to go to learn more about all that. We had a great pro Q&A session this week. Went a little bit farther afield because you folks asked for it. And we brought you back the short vol legend, who also happens to be a Blackjack Hall of Famer and noted author in the space of blackjack, because you folks asked for a special high-level pro Q&A all about all things blackjack. And man, we went into some deep, dark, and mysterious tips in the world. Even if you're not, I'm not really a blackjack guy, and it was fascinating to me. So check that one out if you haven't done so already. Of course, if you missed it, you're not part of it yet, you can head on over to theoptioninsider.com/pro. You can get access to all the previous ones we've done and participate in all the future ones too. It's a good time for everybody out there. You know what else is a good time? It's the old OBC, but it wouldn't be a complete partay without my cohort, my partner in crime, the black-hatted one himself, Mr. Dan Passarelli, the founder of Market Taker Mentoring and author of 1 or 2 or perhaps 47 options-oriented tomes. Mr. P, welcome back to the show of shows, sir.
Hello, Mr. Longo. I am glad to be back. It's been a long time, exactly 1 week, as it is every time we do the show.
It is funny how that 1 week stretches out. It seems like so much longer, doesn't it? Because you missed the show.
It is true. I love doing this.
And before we dive into all the crazy madness we have in store for this week, Mr. P, there's a lot of crazy madness going on over there in the world of MTM. In particular, I know you're fond of some meme stock trading, so I think we should rechristen it. We'll make a new bumper. What do you think? Dan's meme stock of the week or meme trade of the week. What are you cooking up in the meme stock corner this week, sir? What are you trading?
Oh, man, we've got a lot going on. We've got ENDP, which is Endo International PLC, just triggered pretty recently. And let's see, what else we talk about this morning? Lilium did, but I don't think that that's a I don't think that that's an imminent one. I think that that might play out over time. But ENDP is actually starting a little bit of a run right now. It's up 8% right now for those of my traders who jumped right into it. And for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, we've designed a system over here. I've worked on it for about 6 months, honestly, to find some of these short squeeze candidates, these meme stock breakouts. And it's finally up and running. And we're actually doing a webinar on it tomorrow. It's actually an encore to the webinar we did last week, but we're doing a webinar on it tomorrow. And if you go to markettaker.com/SQ, like short for squeeze, you can join us. It's a free webinar. I basically explain how it all works. And for folks that like it, I give you an opportunity to join and actually just get the signals delivered right to you real time.
I do love myself a good meme palooza. The fun thing about the meme stock palooza, Dan, is that it's the gift that keeps on giving. Every day there's a new one to sink your teeth into. So if you get bored easily as a trader, you have a short attention span, maybe the meme stock palooza is good for you. But I am curious for this one. This is not one that we talked about before. Endo International, ENDP, trading a whopping $3 right now, Mr. P, up about 25 cents today, or nearly 9%. So nice little pop out there. But a name like this, I know it's a bit of a divisive issue, trading options on a name sub $5, let alone sub $3 until today. This name, are you going straight stock, or are you actually playing in the options, sir?
Yeah, good question. So normally what we do is we follow along the activity and the options. But when we have these stocks where they're like, $3 and that kind of thing, I'm 100% with you. The options just end up being a silly play. And so, I mean, if it's $300 for 100 shares, I mean, you're way better off just buying the shares, buy 1,000 of them and you can make some pretty decent money still with reasonably low risk.
Dan P slinging 1,000 lots left and right. You heard it here first here. But, I used to have my buddy Alex, the Viceroy Jacobson, one of my co-hosts on the Option Block show, and he would freak out if I even mentioned any options on a stock like below $10. To him, that was just no-go zone out there. So I know it's a contentious issue. We'll probably revisit it again. First, we have to go back and revisit some other issues that folks have questions on. It is time to unleash the mail call.
Mail call. Time to look at questions submitted by our listeners.
All right, everybody, welcome to the mail call, the portion of the show where you folks take the reins, your questions, your comments. They run the gamut, including what we talked about last week. Before I get into that, though, let's pay off some of the questions we've asked you folks recently, including last week. We discussed a question that I know is near and dear to Dan's heart. We asked you, quite simply, what's your favorite Greek? What's the Greek you find yourself fixating on and trading around most? And I thought, Dan kind of thought as well, that it was going to break down probably Delta first and then probably Theta second. And then I thought maybe Vega third and Gamma a distant fourth. It ended up breaking down mostly that way. In fact, Delta came in, Dan, at exactly 50%, followed by Theta number 2. Then what surprised me, Gamma making a bit of a late resurgence, maybe because we talked about it on the show. I don't know. So first off, Theta was 25.7%. And then Gamma was 14.3%. Vega closing at a mere 10%. Dan, are you surprised that Vega getting no love? Gamma fighting its way into third place, sir.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm not that surprised, to tell you the truth. I mean, it kind of makes a little bit of sense, wouldn't you say?
I guess. I just thought Gamma was so obtuse and obscure for a lot of our people. They traded even though they didn't realize that they were. So I thought the latter portion would keep it lower, give it like a 2%. But hey, our audience, they're a pretty savvy bunch for a show like this and a network like ours. So I shouldn't be surprised that you elevate Gamma. It didn't make it to number 2. I knew Theta would claim that, but still intriguing stuff nonetheless. This week, our question, listeners, it's a contentious one because the markets are hot and kind of contentious. And so is volatility this week, listeners. In fact, of course, we've seen some interesting developments out there in the world of the markets. Of course, this week we're coming on the heels of some aggressive selling to start the week, then some middling action yesterday. And then, of course, today we're getting some of the green back on the screen. Most of the major indices today up a firm 1%. VIX got pretty lofty, listeners. It got up into about 28 and change. So we saw a pretty lofty level in the VIX. We thought we'd ask you folks quite simply this week, where do you think VIX is going to end the week? Is this a blip, this sell-off and the pop in vol? Is it a blip on the radar, or is it have a little bit more teeth to it? Kind of effectively asking you to play along with us in the crystal ball that we do every Friday on Volatility Views. We gave you 4 ranges, made it a little bit easier for you. You don't have to guess the exact number. The ranges are very elevated, so where it was at the time you posted this, north of 26. Somewhat elevated, so 23 to about 25.99. Frothy, so about 20 to about 23. And then bubbling, aka below 20. Mr. Dan, we're already selling off. VIX is a little bit shy of 22 handle right now, so it's in the frothy range. Where do you feel we're going to end the week out? And more importantly, where do you think our audience is falling, sir?
I think that we're probably going to end in the frothy area. I mean, when you get some of the volatility that we've had, really not just this week, but the last couple of weeks, I think it belongs living above 20 for the short period of time, no matter what happens in the stocks. And as far as our audience goes, I actually am not cheating, not looking on Twitter, which I assume it's there. I'm going to say they agree with me. That's what I'm going to say.
You have a keen insight into our audience, sir, because by a very small margin, it's actually a pretty widely spread out response, which is kind of interesting. So it means our audience is kind of all over the place too, but ever slightly, number one right now, 30.2% is in the frothy range, Mr. Dan, 20 to 22.99. Followed by number 2, bubbling, which is south of 20, so anywhere below 20, 28.6. And then very elevated, back up north of 26 at 25.4. And the elevated range, 23 to about 25.99 at 15.9%. Of course, you got a little bit more time left. You can vote if you're listening after the fact. It does expire towards the end of the week because it's an end of the week type of poll. And let's keep on going, Dan. Listeners, as you recall, last episode, we talked about the mysteries of options assignment, how it's not always perhaps the done deal that you think it might be. It usually is, but not always. And then our listener last week fell into the cracks, and that opened up some interesting conversation about the nuances of assignment and how it works. I had a feeling some folks would follow up with some questions, and that indeed is the case. First, let's go out to Biggs. Biggs with the Z. Biggs says, hola, OBC. Well, hola, Mr. Biggs. Or perhaps Mrs. Biggs, we don't know. Says, loving the show. I wish I discovered it earlier, as you would have saved me a ton, all caps, a ton of cash versus learning about options on Reddit. Yeah, I think I'll just put it out that way. Yeah, if you want to learn something about a very specialized area, in particular one that's kind of important and may impact your finances, you probably want to go to specialists. You don't want to go out. You know, these public forums are great venues for a lot of things, a lot of great discussions about things like pop culture, or maybe some random historical fact you never knew about before or something. And a lot of things Reddit is great for. Specialized information about specialized subject matter, not so much. You probably want to go to specialists there. You don't want to get advice from some guy who opened up a retail brokerage account 2 months before you did and now is posing as an expert over there on Reddit. Go to a place where people actually know what they're talking about, and you will probably fare a little bit better out there. So I'm glad to see you have discovered us, and keep enjoying Reddit. It is fun, but I think for the specialized information, you probably want to go elsewhere. So congrats on moving on up to Options Bootcamp. His question is, let me get this straight on options assignment. Your options will, in all caps, will be assigned if they expire in the money, unless they aren't. Is that the long and short of it? Well, kind of. It sounds weird to put it that way, but it is kind of how you mentioned. As you said on the show last week, Biggs, and everybody else who still has questions about this. When your options expire even a penny in the money, that triggers what is collectively referred to as automatic exercise. It isn't really. It's not automatically done. There are a few other steps, as we outlined last week. But for all intents and purposes, if your options expire 1 cent in the money, 99.9% of the time, you will have those options assigned if you're short those options. It's just a fact of life. Now, there are times, there are caveats, and looks like our listener last week stumbled into one of these where a customer probably said, you know what, these are pretty close to the money. Maybe I don't have the capital that I need to fully exercise this position. Maybe I just don't want the stock right now. Maybe I think the stock is moving in the after hours, so this closing print is not really indicative of where the stock is now. For a number of reasons, they could decide to issue contra exercise orders. And as I mentioned last week, you kind of have to contact your broker. It's not an easy process. They do this by design. So you can't just click a button. I don't want these. And you don't really know what you're doing. You have to call them up and tell them why. Kind of a little bit of a hassle, but they do it for that reason. And then if that happens, sometimes if you're on the other side of those options that didn't get exercised, you could kind of skate. Sometimes it works out. In this case, I think our listener sounds like it would have worked out if he actually got the stock. He was short the puts. He kind of wanted the stock, and it turned out the stock popped about $1.50 over the subsequent couple of sessions. So that's one of the cases where, again, it just shows you the capricious nature of this space. Sometimes those things happen, and it's just unfortunate. But that's a scenario where that came back to bite him. It could have easily gone the other way, and he could have been very thankful that he didn't end up holding the stock. So, yeah, that's pretty much it. I know it's hard to wrap your head around sometimes, but you can't lean on this. Don't expect your options not to be assigned if they go in the money. Expect they were going to be, because most times they will be. I'm hard pressed to think in my trading career now, which spans several decades, if I've ever, outside of probably had a few when I was down on the SIBO floor, because you're doing thousands, tens of thousands of contracts. You don't notice all of them. But in general, since then, I can't really think of any times where this has happened to me. Dan, anything else you want to add on the whole assignment brouhaha, and also about his point about we saved him a ton of cash versus learning about options on Reddit, sir?
First of all, humbled, glad to help. That's why we do this, because we want to put some good information out there. As far as the other part of the question, your options will be assigned. Will in all caps here in the question. Will, won't, always, never are words that do not exist in the option trader's dictionary. They're not in it. If you grab your copy of the options trader dictionary, you literally will not find those words in there, because there is always something weird that is going to happen every once in a while. So so you can assume that more often than not that they're going to be, but it's always look, this is why I always give the guidance to our students and our listeners here on the show. It's almost always best to close trades before expiration if you don't want to be assigned. And if you want to be assigned, just realize you might not be assigned. So if you have something spread against that, delta spread against an assumed long stock position you're going to get, there could be an outside chance you don't get assigned on those. So, just make sure you have that in the back of your mind.
Yeah, I do kind of feel for this listener, because it sounds like he was one of the few that wanted to be assigned. He wanted the stock, and it would have worked out. So that's just, unfortunately, the way the options wheel turns sometimes. We have more on the assignment issue, Mr. Dan. Next up comes Elliot with 2 T's. Not one, but 2 T's. Elliot with 2 T's says, I heard you mention the small amount of open interest being a factor in options assignment. Can you explain how this can impact whether or not you will be assigned on your short options positions? Thank you very much. Yeah, as I recall from our example last week, I don't have it in front of me. I do believe the OI was sub 1,000. It was something like 982 contracts, something like that. So what you have there is a fairly illiquid option to begin with, right? It's not like an Apple at the money weekly call that's going to have hundreds of thousands of contracts open. People are opening and closing positions every day. Your chances of being in that massive amount of options and then having them expire in the money and getting the small infinitesimal fraction of people who decide not to exercise and having you be on the other side of that are extremely small. And a name like this that we were talking about last week, where sub 1,000 contracts open, there's only a handful of customers there. Could even be one for all we know. So the chances of one of them maybe deciding to do something that impacts a large swath of the open interest is much higher. And you could easily be on the other side of that, as it sounds like our listener was. So yeah, when you trade in these smaller, illiquid or less liquid type names, your chances of occasionally bumping into these types of things could be higher, because one person's decision, where one customer's decision in the massive hurricane of contracts in Apple, unless they're a massive fund, maybe not going to make much of a difference. But one person's decision in a smaller, less liquid name could have more lasting ramifications out there. Mr. Dan, what are your thoughts on OI and how it could impact whether you skate on these options or not?
I think that's a pretty good assessment. Like your percentage chance could be potentially higher if there's lower open interest. I mean, that said, look, anything can happen anytime to anyone. And so, like, the important thing is, if there is a whole bunch of open interest, you don't want to go into Friday expiration and be like, oh, hey, man, there's a bunch of open interest. I know I'm going to get assigned, right? Like anything can happen either way. So whether there's a big percentage chance of something happening or a small percentage chance of something happening, realize that first of all, that's your perception of a big or small chance. And second of all, even small chances can happen. So, just still keep it in mind, protect yourself, and be super conservative. If you don't want to get assigned, close the position. If you do want to get assigned, realize you might not. And by the way, just going back to the last question, if you were wanting to get assigned and it was like right there in the money and you didn't get assigned, you might be in an okay situation. You could be in a profitable situation where it's like, oh, I get to keep this money. Okay, great. Now I'll just write another put or whatever it was. And maybe even write an in the money put to increase your chance of getting assigned, and use some of the proceeds that you just made by skating and having that option expire, to sort of P&L that against what effective price you get assigned at next time.
All right, Dan, next up we have definitely the question of the week, sir, and definitely the most important, salient question of our day. Angus wants to know, did Dan go to the secret Metallica show in Chicago this week? Dan, you know what he's talking about? Did you hear about this?
I did, yeah, at the Metro.
Yes. Yes, the Metro.
I did not attend I did not attend. I'm definitely not cool enough to find out about these things in advance anymore, I guess. But that would be pretty darn cool. The Metro is it's one of Chicago's best venues. Nice, small, intimate, gigantic stage, great sound. That would be really cool to see.
Only about 1,000 people can be in there. I've only been to the Metro once. Can you recall, Dan, the name of the band I may have seen perform? They had a guitarist who, as I recall, was like a jerk. The crowd was hating them. They were throwing beer bottles out there saying, get off the stage. Are you familiar with that band, Mr. Dan?
Well, their bass player is super freaking cool. That would be, yeah. Mark was kind enough to come and see when my band played there a couple years back.
So there you go. Now you can say you played the same stage as Metallica, sir. There you go. Put that feather in your cap. That was a hilarious question. Good job. Bonus points for Angus out there. Yeah, that they announced a concert apparently very last minute. Only 1,000 people can go. It's $20 cash only at the door. And you had to be there to buy the ticket. You couldn't buy them for friends. So apparently they showed pictures of it. Second the news got out, though, the line was all the way around, literally around an entire city block. So well more than 1,000 people were in line by the time the news got out. So Dan didn't have much chance to come all the way out from Frankfurt to get the tickets. But cool stuff nonetheless. Dan's already been there and done that. He's played that stage. So he doesn't need to go back. All right, let's move on. Oh, here's a little bit of love from Alan. Alan says, just wanted to say I'm loving the Options Insider Secret Club. Oh, well, thank you, Alan. He says, this week's Blackjack Hall of Fame Q&A session was absolutely amazing, and I don't even really play blackjack. Yeah, I don't either, Alan, but I was fascinated. I was riveted by it, let alone all you folks out there who are hardcore or want to be hardcore, and we're asking all these awesome questions to our Hall of Fame guest there. Quite literally, there is a Blackjack Hall of Fame, and he is in it. He goes on to say, I will definitely use those tricks in the future. Oh, your network is the best, and I'm very glad that I signed up for Options Insider Pro. Thanks for producing this quality content. Well, it's for folks like you, Alan, that we do all of this at the end of the day. We kind of try to provide you folks with something extra above and beyond the network itself. We know a lot of you spend a lot of time consuming the network on demand, and we love all of you folks out there, but a lot of you also want something more, something additional, something to fill your day trading. So we also have the live, which is available there for all the pro members. And in addition to the live, you also get these awesome sessions, the pro Q&A session. We've had a litany of great folks in there, not just the Blackjack Hall of Famer. That was the one-off non-options related thing, even though we did talk a little bit of short ball. We've had Scott Nations in there recently. I mentioned Alex the Viceroy. He was in there not too long. Jack Schwager, the Market Wizards creator. A lot of great people have been in there just in the last few weeks that we've been doing this out there. So fascinating stuff. And of course, every Friday, you also get Options Oddities, which is our unusual activity, full breakdown show. We break down all the crazy stuff. A lot of you folks in the Secret Club get to hit us up with, hey, I saw this crazy trade. Let's talk about it. So It's been fascinating, especially with the meme stock stuff going up right now. We could probably do that Options Oddity shows for 5 hours at the end of the week every week. There's a lot of stuff to get to. So glad to see you're enjoying it. If you don't know what the heck we're talking about, at theoptionsinsider.com/pro, you can learn more, see what it's all about out there. If you want to go above and beyond, then you can join Alan. Great crew in there. I got to say, they're very polite, very nice. You know, you hear all these horrible stories about, online communities, but I got to say our listeners are very nice, helpful, supportive people. They ask each other questions. They talk to each other. It's great to see. So check it out, theoptioninsider.com/pro. Easy for me to say, theoptioninsider.com/pro, the place to go to learn more. David Avina, he says, I'm looking for a link to boot camp to learn from the beginning. Well, a lot of you have this question all the time. The place I usually point you folks are either our website or the app. What I did discover recently, though, David, you may have encountered this, and anyone else who's going to our site to look for this, Options Bootcamp's been around for a while. And we've gone through multiple site iterations over that time. And sometimes when you port the site data from one site to the next, the handshake doesn't always go smoothly. And one of our editors was looking recently and noticed that some of the early episodes of Options Bootcamp, for whatever reason, were missing from our site. It was strange. So if you went to our website, theoptioninsider.com, click on that shows tab there, and you go to Options Bootcamp, and for whatever reason, you saw some weird data there, that has been fixed now. So you can go to our website, get all of the archived episodes of Options Bootcamp. I also recommend for a lot of you out there to just grab our app. It's completely free and it doesn't have any legacy issues. It goes straight from our network distributor, our network data provider. So all of the data that's there goes straight to the app. So there's no layers of a website or anything else in between you and the content. You can build your own playlist. You can do a bunch of great stuff. Ask questions directly from the app. So it's on iOS, it's on Android, it's even on Kindle Fire if you want to go that way. So a lot of you like the app. And it is far and away the easiest way to get everything. You don't have to deal with, let's say, iTunes limiting you to the most recent 50 episodes. But you can go to our website as well. Those are two great places to get all of the stuff. Other than that, your mileage is going to vary depending on the outlet. And there's more outlets adding this stuff pretty much every week. As I go to my email right now, I'm sure there's 3 more outlets saying, hey, we want to add your stuff. It's crazy how many podcast outlets are out there now. So each one of those has different levels of how much they will display. So it's up to you. Your mileage may vary. The best places to go to get all of them, our website or our mobile app. All right. Bestus, next up, Dan. He says, I like this handle, Bestus. Sounds like an ancient Roman name writing in. He says, Bestus US says, I've been digging into the OBC archives during my somewhat lengthy new commute. Oh, interesting. He says, now I can tell my wife that I'm actually using that time to learn something, so she stops giving me such a hard time about it. Okay, glad we can help. He said, thanks for giving me a nice excuse. I particularly loved your episodes on calendar spreads. I've been dipping my toes into this strategy more recently, and it's hard to find good content on them. Why don't more people talk about calendar spreads? They are a great way to trade these markets. Mr. Dan, what's up? Why don't people want to talk about calendar spreads, sir?
That is a great question, because calendar spreads can be one of the most powerful strategies out there for option traders. And what I mean by that is you can get the most edge, like the best statistical advantage by trading calendars. If you're good at them. And yeah, I don't know why people talk about it. Next month, I have a whole month-long class all on calendars. It's a 4-part series once a week, every week of next month. So yeah, I talk about them. I love talking about them. They're great.
I've wrestled with this myself as to why this particular strategy, and I've said it before in the archives of this show, I often refer to calendar spreads as a 201, if not a 301 type options strategy. A lot of people just have a hard time wrapping their heads around them. Even very sophisticated options professionals who've been in the space for a long time. You'll talk to some of them behind the scenes like, yeah, I don't really do calendar. It's not something they like to do. And it's just, I think for a lot of people, having those two contrasting positions on at the same time is very hard to wrap their heads around. I mean, you have a vertical spread, you're buying a call, you're selling a farther out of the money call. It's all in the same month. You can wrap your head intuitively around it. The underlying goes up, what happens, that sort of thing. Now you have a long and a short positions really on the same strike in different months on at the same time. And so traditionally, for example, if you're short at the money options, like you are in most calendar spreads, you want the underlying to hang out there and do nothing. And yet, if you're long a little bit farther out of the money options or farther, let's say in time, at the same strike options there. You have a little bit more vega. You want the underlying to pop. You want it to move. So you have these weird two contrasting positions. And I know for a lot of people, that juxtaposition is just something they just can't deal with or they don't want to deal with. And so I can understand why there isn't more. We've thankfully tackled calendar spreads many times on this show. We're not reticent to talk about them. I think for a lot of our audience is reticent to hear about them. Maybe that's part of the reason why we don't do calendar spreads like every week. It's intimidating to a lot of people. So that could also be another reason why you don't see a lot of content out there for them, is people just, maybe there isn't a huge demand versus something a little bit more basic. But we do have a lot of them in the archives. Again, I mentioned the ways to get our archives earlier in the show if you do want to go back. And hey, if you're like Bestis, you want to hear more about calendars or any other position that really kind of floats your boat, you have questions about, you know where to find us. Hit us up over there at theoptionsinsider.com or at options on most of the major social media platforms. Of course, if you're part of the Pro or the Plus, your questions get bumped to the top of the list. Let's go out here to Tim, Dan. Tim has a question that I think is right up your alley. Given how you're trading these days, you are Mr. Straddle these days, pretty much. Let's go out here. He has a very basic, but maybe deceptively so question. He says, hello, I have a question, please. Again, I love our audience. So polite. I'm not sure when I should use a strangle versus a straddle. Seems like they are very similar trades with similar use cases. What is the dividing line to choose between them? Thank you for your consideration. Well, you're welcome, Tim. And you're right, they are somewhat similar, but there are some key differences out there in strangles versus straddles. Dan, I'll let you run with this one first because you're Mr. Straddle these days. You're slinging straddles all over the place. When do you switch between a strangle and a straddle? As Tim puts it, what is your dividing line, sir?
Yeah, the main reason why I decide between a straddle and a strangle is I'm usually looking for a pure volatility play with no directional bias, so like delta indifferent, delta neutral. And so when stocks are at the money, or really when they're just a little bit south of at the money, is when we get in exactly zero delta. I love to use straddles. They're my default. But if the stock is like right between two strike prices, whichever strike price I choose is going to give me a delta. So I prefer to use a strangle in those cases because then I get a real nice delta neutral trade.
Yeah, there are a lot of reasons why people tend to use one versus the other. The one reason that I see, and most often I think drives a lot of people for doing this, and it probably really is the wrong reason, is people look at a name, they think it's going to move. They look at the straddle, see how much it costs, and they're like, oh, this strangle gives me a lot of the bang for the buck, but it's a lot cheaper. I'm going to go that way. And vice versa, if they want to go the short premium route. They think this name's going to sit, but then maybe they're a little bit spooked. They don't want to commit fully to selling, let's say, that at-the-money straddle. They want to give themselves a little bit of wiggle room, a little bit of a cushion, when they go the other route on the Iron Condor. In fact, our guest just yesterday, the Blackjack Hall of Famer, also a big legendary short vol trader, he's often said that iron condors are iron butterflies for cowards, talking on the short side there. And you can make a similar analogy to strangles versus straddles out there. So if you're just worried about the premium levels, that is not the reason to go about it. Hopefully you have a better reason to choose for one versus the other. And again, Dan's been much more on the pro straddle front. You know, straddles, they can be difficult if you don't know what you're doing. So be careful. It sounds simple. Oh, I can buy a straddle, I'll make money no matter where the market moves. And the answer is yes to that, but often no. We've talked about that many times if you want to know why. Get into our archives and check it out, or hit us up here for the next episode of the old OBC. But Mr. Dan, that music means we got to get out of here for this week. But before we go, if folks have questions about any of the stuff we talked about on the show today, or perhaps you want to leave them a hint, leave them a tease of what's cooking in the land of MTM, now is the time, sir. The floor is yours.
Yeah, so those of you who are watching live, or if you watch it really quick after it gets posted, definitely, if you're interested in the short squeezes and interested in that style of trading, definitely attend my complimentary webinar tomorrow, Thursday morning. Just go to markettaker.com/SQ. And if you're interested in that style of trading, I think you'll find it really interesting. I don't hold back. I share literally exactly the steps that I take to find these trades. So you're invited. Show up.
There you go. Market Taker, 2 T's is the place to go. And this will be out well before then, Dan, so we'll have plenty of time to hear this on demand even and still check it out. Of course, you know where to go to learn more about all the content we put out here including the cool stuff for the secret club, folks. TheOptionSinsider.com/pro is the place to go to learn more. Of course, later on today, you'll have Brian Overby coming at you with OPR. If you're not listening to OPR and you're listening to OBC, you're missing out. Very much a sister show, not just because they have similar acronyms for their titles, but they are very much hand-in-hand educational programs. If you listen to both of these shows, I think you'll be served very well in terms of your options education. So check that out wherever you're listening to this. If you just listen to the boot camp, make sure you go upgrade to the full network. That'll get you all the shows we do, not just OPR and OBC, but you get vol views, you get the option block, you get the crypto rundown, you get the advisors option, this week in futures option, so many shows. You'll definitely be sated with options content. I guarantee you that. And of course, we'll see you back here throughout the rest of the week for all of our rest of our content, and then back again next Education Wednesday, another episode of Options Bootcamp.
You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions at theoptionsinsider.com.